What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Broadway Joel, the voice of Dominican boxing, and today is a very special interview for me. Someone maybe you guys aren't familiar with, but will be very impressed with this man's resume once we go down the list. Uh, he was ranked by several magazines from Cable Facts, the Imagen Foundation, and Sports Illustrated as one of the most influential Latinos in the world. So this is a quite an honor to have you on. I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interview you.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. It really is. And talking about boxing, which is one of my favorite subjects, and talking about sports in general. Not so much talking about me. I don't think I'm as comfortable talking about me, but certainly talking about sports and the things that we do, and talking about just even opportunities for people who want to get into sports and really flourish in this environment. That's definitely my pleasure.
Okay, all right. We won't get too deep in the nitty gritty as to who you are, but I do want to know a little bit about you, and I do want the people to know just a little bit. So I want to start off by where you're from and what's your nationality? Like, where were you raised, and also what's your nationality?
Well, yo soy un puertorriqueño from the Bronx. I was born in Manhattan, grew up in the Bronx, went to high school actually outside of New York. I was in one of these special programs that basically take kids from the inner cities and give them a different environment from which to sprout their wings. And actually, funnily, this weekend I'm going to one of the anniversaries of the program. I'm not going to say which one because I definitely would be dating myself by giving you a number. But it was a great experience coming outside of New York and having that kind of broader view of the world. But I'm a Bronx guy, Knicks fan, rooting for them to continue their winning ways in the
So,
series. Really excited. It's been a long time that I've root for the Knicks in this way, and they really got a special team. But yeah, I'm from the Bronx. Went to school outside of Philadelphia in high school. Went to school in the University of Delaware, which is not too far from there, and that's actually where my son went to school as well, and where President Biden went to school. Started out my career in sales and telecommunication sales. But then down the road, I got into the television business through cable television and, have been hooked into the media space ever since. So, really exciting. I've had the opportunity to work at places like HBO, Sony, ESPN. And now I've taken all of that and started my own company, Unánimo Deportes, or Unánimo Sports Media is the official name of the company, and basically bringing all that together, kind of doing it's a little microcosm of ESPN. I had the pleasure and the honor of launching ESPN Deportes back in 2004. So this is the 20th anniversary of that launch. Grew it to a successful business, an important part of the way that ESPN reaches the Hispanic market. And there are quite a few people that work there that are part of my team here at Unánimo Deportes. And we're trying to do a lot of the same that we did back then and doing a little bit more. I think there's always ways of reaching the market that is innovative and allows us to, communicate better and tap into our information based, knowledge base, and connect with fans, which is the important part. So that's what I do now. I dedicate myself to that. I can say I pretty much work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. On the weekends, I slow down a little bit only because other people aren't working. And so I'm able to concentrate on the stuff that I can't get done when I'm fielding calls and that kind of thing. But it's really rewarding, and it's something that we've been doing. It'll be our 5th-year anniversary in September, and we're excited about the things that we're looking to do and continue to develop.
okay, all right. Well, thank you for making time out of your busy schedule to give me an interview. But I wanted to circle back a little bit. You have mentioned you have went to the University of Delaware, and from what I understand, you majored in psychology. How did you go from psychology to like TV exec? Like, give me the chronological order how you ended up in HBO, Universal, Sony, ESPN. Can you give me the chronological order of how things worked out after college?
Yeah, a little bit. So it's reaching back, but yeah, I mean, from college I went into sales and telecommunication sales. Back then, it was I was selling actually business telephone systems, and that was around the time that there was a breakup in the AT&T monopoly. So, for people who know when that happened, you'll have a sense of when that was. There was a time when AT&T controlled everything, local landlines, everything national, and they got broken. They got broken up, and on the business side, businesses had to buy their phone systems from AT&T, and I was in what's called the interconnect business, where you can sell private systems to businesses, and so that's what I started doing right out of school. I just got into that. In psychology, you either have to go for your master's or a PhD or a doctorate to really grow into that profession. As a psychiatrist, it's an MD, and as a psychologist, it's a PhD or sometimes an MA. I was going to go to graduate school, but I decided to go straight into the workforce and got into sales, hoping that psychology would help me with sales. I wasn't the best salesman in the world, but I gave it a shot. I was out walking the streets of New York, Queens, everywhere, and selling systems. And then, I got into, there was an opportunity to get into the cable industry. It was one of those things. It was an organization called the Walter Cates Foundation, and they basically were recruiting people to get into the cable business, giving them an opportunity to test different. In my particular case, I ended up in what was then called Paragon Cable, which was in northern Manhattan, and is now Spectrum, right? Spectrum. And Manhattan was divided into two. It was northern Manhattan, southern Manhattan. Northern Manhattan was north of 86th Street on the east side, and I don't know, it was 79th Street on the west side. Everything north of that was Paragon. Everything below that was Manhattan Cable. And I started out in cable ad sales, and also out door to door cable sales, and which was kind of a mix, a mishmash, but it was sales at the end of the day. One was connecting people to the cable service, and the other one was the very beginning of the local. Well, there were attempts prior to that to do local ad sales, where you're able to sell spots on all the networks. But that was the first time that they combined northern Manhattan and southern Manhattan. After that, they did it throughout the boroughs, and much bigger operation these days, and national. There wasn't as much of a focus on ad sales when it came to the cable companies back then, but now there is, and so a lot of companies have clustered in different areas. So you have a Spectrum or a Comcast, which are the two biggest players in cable nationally, and they kind of cluster their systems. Before it was one little system here, one little system there, spread all over. Some systems were 10,000 subscribers or 5,000 subscribers, and now you're talking about each of these companies have millions and millions of subscribers. But that was a first attempt at selling local ad sales. So I did that. And then I'm trying to think what happened right after that. I was there for a few years. Then I got a job. I always wanted to live in Puerto Rico. I got a job at the cable company in Puerto Rico as a marketing manager. And there's actually where my son was born. So he was born in Puerto Rico. And it looks like we got, oh, sorry. Am I still on?
No. Yeah, we're good. We're good on my end.
Okay. I just had a few weird things pop up on my screen. Sorry about that. All right. All right. So I'll just continue. So, I became the marketing manager at this cable company. It's called TCI. and it was regional. It had a couple of towns that we serviced, and so TCI as a company is now Comcast. Was bought by Comcast. Before that, it was bought by AT&T. There's a whole kind of when you're around as long as I am, you go through and you see the kind of the history of how things evolve and where things came from. But I was working as a marketing manager there, and my next stop after that was kind of more in the big time in the national space at HBO. I actually was one of the first people that was selling multicultural, or basically a multicultural marketing manager. Back then, it was called ethnic marketing, believe it or not. Now it's the word multicultural is basically used to cover all the things that relate to hitting the various markets outside of the general market. But that was ethnic marketing. And it was a pretty exciting time for me, connecting with the home box office as the HBO letters, what they stand for. No, half the people don't know that.
Were you a part of the beginning of HBO Latino? Or is that what you're telling me? Or
I was there before HBO Latino. I actually hired the person who basically ran HBO Latino for a bunch of years. She was 25 years old, came from Avon. I hired her, and then she, I think, went up to becoming an executive vice president of running all multicultural stuff at HBO and running HBO Latino, Lucinda Martinez. So yeah, I mean, I was there before that. When I was there, it was called HBO en Español. So I came in to basically put some marketing muscle behind that. It was a light version of what HBO Latino is now. But the vision back then was to do what HBO Latino is now, which was to get original content in Spanish. Back then, it was all dubbed content, movies primarily. And
no boxing? They had boxing then, no? Right?
Yeah. HBO boxing was part of the HBO umbrella before then. And then we had when there was HBO boxing, we had our guys doing boxing in Spanish, calling the fights separately on SAP. Though it was SAP because HBO en Español was not a separate channel; it was an SAP primarily. Now, some people opted to take the HBO feed and put it on a separate channel. Some cable operators did that, but cable operators then and even now in some cases have limited channel space. So they there's but so much that they can dedicate to in terms of channel inclusion. But so that's what that was, and I was there. How long was that at HBO? 6 years, 7 years, it was great. And I was there when we signed the contract with Oscar de la Hoya. And he came in. He was a pup. I remember he was like the nicest kid. He was a kid, and we would go out to boxing gyms around California. I remember going to a boxing gym in Oxnard, and he had just come from winning an Olympic gold medal just maybe a couple of years after that, and so he was an inspiration to any kid in a boxing gym. And he was there, and he was just a great guy, great kid, and obviously he went on to have a tremendous career, become a boxing promoter. I mean, we know Oscar and we know what he's been able to do, but I remember when he didn't have gray hair and he was just, I think he was maybe 20 years old, And so, yeah, that's like I said, that's what happens when you've been around for a long time. And
you get to relive these memories and tell these stories. So I'm sure that's that's the good part of the journey as well. How did you end up at ESPN? And tell me about, from what I understand, you helped build ESPN Deportes. Can you break that down for me?
Well, between HBO and ESPN, I left HBO in before the year 2000. Let's put it that way, just a couple of years before that, and I ended up getting my first general manager job, which was at Sony. Sony had and still has a channel called Sony Entertainment Television, which services Latin America. And it serviced all of Latin America, and based in Caracas, Venezuela. So I moved from New York to Caracas, and the funny thing was that
Really?
it was a partnership. There was a partnership there between 5 companies. Sony was one of them. Warner Brothers was the other company. Disney was one of the companies. A local a local company as well, and HBO. So I remember when I went to interview for the job, and I landed in the airport in Caracas, and I'm leaving HBO. I'm working for HBO at the time. There's a big sign, HBO, and there, and it was for me. And I was like, it was the weirdest thing because I work for HBO. I'm looking for I'm interviewing for another job, and it's still tied into HBO. So you can say that even the 2 years that I was at Sony, I was still with HBO, at least the partnership that HBO had with the group down in Latin America. And so that was my first general manager job, running an operation completely. Prior to that, I was in marketing. It was just my whole thing was making sure that people were aware of our product, that they were convinced that this was a product that they should have and enjoy. And then I moved from that to being in a position of running the whole operation, P&L, profit and loss, sales, operations, everything, production. And that was a great experience for me. And it really, I took my kind of marketing skills and marketing frame of mind into that job. And, we did it. We did a great job for the 2 years that I was there. I was homesick, being in Caracas. And by the way, when I was there, Hugo Chavez was voted into office. I remember being told that, that's a great time to go home and visit your family during the elections, because you never know what's going to happen, especially if he didn't win at that time, given the kind of the sentiment, the public sentiment that there was. So, this was during that time. And, it was a great experience, and I got to travel throughout Latin America. The channel was pan-regional, which means that it basically was the entire continent. So, including Brazil, which in Brazil, it was obviously in Portuguese, not in Spanish. But, it was my first opportunity to go down to Argentina, to Brazil. I was in Venezuela, Colombia, in different countries where Sony Entertainment Television was watched, and great experience for me, just great experience.
And all that experience throughout Latin America, I'm sure that helped you once you did go to ESPN, helped you know what to do and how to promote to certain markets. Can you break down how you got the ESPN job, and as well as what exact, because from what I understand, you helped build it from the ground up. So I kind of want to know the details as to how you did that.
Sure. So after Sony, I actually worked for USA Network when I came back to the States. And again, I would come up once a month, but it's just I felt very isolated being down there. And I did make it. I promised myself and my son, I was already separated from his mother at the time, that I would be up to see him every month. And over the course of the 2 years, I was able to do that every single month, whether it was specifically to visit him or the family, or, taking advantage perhaps of a business trip to New York. I made it every single month. And so I was, like I said, homesick. I ended up getting a job with USA Network. So at that time, USA was separate from, it's now owned by NBC Universal. It was a separate entity. It actually changed hands a number of times during that period of time, but it was always the sister network or the brother network to the Sci-Fi channel. So it was USA, Sci-Fi, and there were a couple of other networks that were bought afterwards, Trio and NWI. But for my job there was I was an affiliate marketing manager and head of local ad sales. So I would put together these packages to help the cable operators promote the programs that we had and the original movies that we had and that type of thing. I also had a great experience there because during the time that I was there, USA had the rights to the PGA Tour, and they had 30 stops of the tour. And we put together a program where we would help, we would actually introduce a lot of the youth, underprivileged, let's call them multicultural, but really underprivileged. It was more of a economic incentive. We would introduce them to the game of golf. And I remember going to different places. We even went to a tribe out in Arizona, and we would it was a 4-week clinic. I would normally go out there at the beginning of the clinic, and then there would be instructors that would stay with the kids over the 4 weeks. But it was a great connection with inner city youth, and what we were trying to do was to introduce them to the game and the benefits of the game. Being out on the golf course. I don't know if you're a golfer, but the whole experience of walking the greens and the tranquility. It's also obviously a game that's on the honor system in many ways, right? And so it was just a great experience, and introducing that, and then at the end of the 4 weeks, they would get their own set of golf clubs. So this was a really big investment on the part of USA at the time, and the kids' eyes would light up, and it was just great. It was just great. I had to give you that as a segue, because I just when you're able to do this and you're out in the whatever your career is, and you're able to give back, it's a great feeling. It just is. You may go to and I've had the chance to go to great fights and go to Super Bowl and go to NBA All-Star and World Series games, but in the sports world. But when you're able to give back to youth, it's a great feeling. So that's part of what I did at USA Network. And then the ESPN thing was just, and it's interesting because when I was a cable operator in Puerto Rico, I remember, I wanted to have more Spanish language channels to be able to offer up. Even in Puerto Rico, all the channels on cable were English language. It was really nothing in Spanish, nothing like it is today. There was nothing in Spanish. And I remember even meeting with the people at ESPN and saying, hey, what we need is a Spanish language ESPN channel, and this was back 10 years, how many more years before? More, like 12 years before the ESPN job. And finally, there was an announcement that ESPN was going to launch ESPN Deportes. And when I saw that, I said, this is my job. I am getting this job. I don't care who else is trying to go for it. And then, of course, some of it is who in terms of being able to get into the door. And, obviously, I've been in the cable industry for a while. I knew the people at ESPN, and I, was able to get in the door there. And, I got the job. So I started in June of 2003. And I was brought in specifically to launch ESPN Deportes. That was my job, to launch it and run it. So, it was, I was there I don't know how many months, 8 months or so before the launch. We had plans, we had the blueprint, and there was a countdown clock. There was even a countdown clock in Bristol, Connecticut, where ESPN is based, that counted the days down to the launch of ESPN Deportes. And, we worked, furiously to get everything together, to hire people on the production end. On my very first day on the job, my very first day on the job was at they don't do this anymore, but it was called the National Cable Television Association Conference. And that was in Chicago. And on my first day on the job, I was at that conference, and we all went up to one of the hotel rooms and we met. And the first thing was to talk about, the launch of ESPN Deportes and where we were going to put SportsCenter, because SportsCenter, that's the jewel, right? That's the first thing you want to get right. We got to get SportsCenter right. And so we were talking about the location of where we were going to do SportsCenter. And I remember that we were talking about, do we do it in North Carolina, where there was an operation there, still is, called ESPN Regional Television. and a lot of the college sports games were produced from that group at the time. So we had a base of operation in North Carolina. We were looking at Argentina, where there was already a setup for ESPN Latin America. And where else? They looked at other places like Los Angeles, right? Because the logic, right? The majority of the U.S. Hispanic market is in L.A. I mean, that's the number one U.S. Hispanic market, followed by New York, and then followed by Miami. Those are the top three Hispanic markets. So we looked at those, but there was a cost issue. So, at the end of the day, we decided on Mexico. And so SportsCenter was launched in Mexico. We didn't have the space up in Bristol, Connecticut. There just wasn't enough space. So, we had a whole operation in Mexico. And then out of that, the whole operation out of Mexico was born out of being able to produce SportsCenter out of Mexico, because it's almost like you plant the seed there. Even though the ESPN was for U.S. Hispanic, we planted the seed in Mexico, and that mushroomed into the operation that's there right now. That's somewhat separate, but still tied into ESPN Deportes. So that was my input, my entree was job. It wasn't a job posting. It was an announcement. It was a press release. We're launching ESPN Deportes, and I bugged the hell out of everybody I knew there, including the then CEO George Bodenheimer, until I got the job. So the rest is history. I was there for over 13 years. We did a lot of things there. We first started in television, and then we expanded into radio. We launched ESPN Deportes Radio. We also branched into publications, ESPN Deportes La Revista, and there was an online presence already for Latin America, but then we basically made it more U.S. centric. So, we created a 360 around, around the brand, which is similar to what I'm doing in a much smaller way with Unánimo Deportes, a 360. We have radio, we have a website, we have the app, we're developing a connected TV channel. So we're going to be on a streaming basis. We're creating television. So we're doing it on a smaller level, but we're taking everything that we learned at ESPN, myself and other people who were at ESPN, and we're doing Unánimo Deportes. And again, that's almost my 100% focus these days.
No, and we're definitely gonna get into that, because I definitely want to know more about Unánimo Deportes. But I wanted to ask you, it's through my research, you have 3 Emmys. You've won 3 Emmys.
Yeah.
What film? What film?
No, these are sports Emmys.
Sports Emmys. Okay.
Yeah, these are sports Emmys. So interestingly, and I'm forgetting the year that it was. I was actually in a committee. I was invited by some industry colleagues to connect with the organization that does the Emmys. The Emmys are divided into the primetime Emmys, and then there are the daytime Emmys, and the daytime Emmys group, which is Natas, also oversees the sports Emmys. And so the committee that I was brought into was to bring in Spanish language Emmys, period, not just sports, but period. Like, to see if other content on Spanish language television could also have these national Emmys. So I was on this committee, and I was in it. I can't say it was one of these things that was long and drawn out. I think that I was on the committee for less than a year, and we worked furiously with the organization, and we finally got the approval to have Spanish language Emmys. And so one of the categories that I said was sports Emmys, Spanish language sports Emmys. And so that very first year, we won 2 sports Emmys for entries for ESPN Deportes. I think one was for Sports Center, and the other one was trying to remember the other one. That's what happens. Yeah, there's a lot of you live through a lot of stuff over the years, but then you forget a lot of stuff too. So one was Sports Center, our Sports Center, which we were just talking about.
Was it Nación? Was it Nación ESPN
No, it
or
was before
Fútbol
that.
Picante?
No, it was before that. It might have been Personality. It might have been the sports show, Sports Center, and I think it might have been Personality, because that's one of the categories. So anyway, so we won 2 that first year, and then the second year after that, we won 1. I think that was, you know what? I think that was 2014. The 2 and then the 1 in 2015. Yeah, I believe so. So those are the 3. And then since then, they've continued to win sports Emmys, and they've done some original content that they've won sports Emmys for, which is great, because I really believe in the storytelling part of sports, not just, following the athletes and the teams and the scores, but also telling the stories. There's some very rich stories in sports that we do at Unánimo, and that we want to continue to do as well.
Okay, all right. I thought you won the Emmys for documentaries. I was gonna tell you, man. I think I got your 4th Emmy on the way. I got an idea for a documentary. It's just hard, I guess, organizing and structuring it. But that's a story for another day.
No,
But
talk about that. Certainly open to any ideas on that front. I mean, like I said, for Unánimo, we're definitely into that right now.
okay.
We're doing a lot of short versions, short form. We want to go into longer form. We actually did one very interestingly on the audio side on the first Latino boxing champion ever. It was Panama Al Brown. And actually, our mutual friend Jose Corpas wrote a book about that called Black Ink. Very good book. Yeah.
No, I don't have it around.
Yeah. So you know the book, right?
Yes. I have the book. It's just I thought I had it close by, but I must have moved it.
So that's actually how I connected with Jose, because we did this piece, and we did a 22-minute audio documentary on him. And then I started doing some research. Actually, after that, I started doing more research. And then I connected, I saw what he did, and I connected with him. And so he connected us. So, somehow you can thank Panama Al Brown for connecting us and Jose. And by the way, it's a fascinating story. You have the book, it is just really fascinating. We couldn't do it total justice in the 22 minutes, which was the length of the podcast. But, those are the types of stories that we want to be able to tell. And Panama Al Brown, just for the viewers here, was crowned champion in the, excuse me, I believe in the featherweight division in 1929, and was a Black Panamanian, skinny, probably. For most people, he had the style to some extent of a Tommy Hearns, right? Tommy Hearns, tall, powerful punching, and was very successful. And anyway, his story is very colorful. I could spend the rest of the time talking about him and his story. But it's one of the things that we like to do, and we want to do more of.
No, for sure, and that's amazing. You were named by Cable Facts one of the most influential minorities, Imagen Foundation one of the most influential Latinos, and Sports Illustrated one of the most influential minorities as well. When you hear that, when your name was brought up in that ilk, what was the feeling like? And yeah, like what was that feeling like when you got that those recognition?
Yeah, well, it's a great feeling, of course. When you work at anything, it's great to be recognized by your peers or different organizations. That's a great thing. I will say this, some of that comes with your position, your title, who you work for. I wouldn't have, people would not have known about me if I wasn't working at ESPN at the time. and it feels great. It really is. I mean, you're using terms that that by the word minority, which isn't even used anymore, it gives you an idea of how long ago that was. But it was a great feeling. That was kind of in one of my first years at ESPN, given the newness of what we were doing and what we were initiating. I got that recognition, and it was great by Sports Illustrated, and then some of the others just. I guess in terms of my relative position at the time, I think a lot of these things um, are about the position that you have. I'll be honest with you. I'd like for them to be more about your contributions. I'd like to be able to not necessarily be recognized in the future, but certainly want to do these, contribute to sports, and even if nobody knows, even if people have forgotten me, that at least through Unánimo, that they're able to, you know, hear about the stories and be able to learn something and get something out of it, be inspired. So I think that I'm proud of the recognition. Again, it was a while back, but it is part of my history and trajectory. And thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. So we've been mentioning Unánimo Deportes, throughout the interview, but and you mentioned you guys almost 5 years in September. You'll hit 5 years that you've been around. What exactly is the goal of Unánimo Deportes? Obviously, it's a business, and business is the goals is to make money. But what is the mission statement, I guess, that you guys are looking for to accomplish with Unánimo Deportes?
Well, our mission is to cover all the sports that are of interest to the U.S. Hispanic market. And in the case of our marketplace, you can say that it's all the sports that the U.S. in general is interested in, plus some additional ones. Especially the one that stands out is soccer, football, as we call it in Spanish. That obviously, over the last years has been gaining more and more ground, but isn't one of the top three yet. And so we cover soccer, football extensively, and then of course boxing and baseball. So our thing is to cover the sports that are of interest to Latinos, follow the athletes, the teams, and kind of be on top of it and be a source of information. That's the mission. The vision is to be able to tell the stories of these athletes. So kind of getting back to what I mentioned about Panama Al Brown, it's really telling these stories that maybe people have not heard about. I would think that most people probably that are listening or watching the show may not have heard of Panama Al Brown, don't know that he was the first Latino boxing champion ever, don't know that it was almost 100 years ago, don't know that he was black, and that's our true north. When you look at our true north, telling these stories, being able to really inspire and inform with these stories. And I think that the inspiration part is really important, because sports is used as a metaphor in so much of our language, right? When you talk about, in the swing of things, there's all kinds of metaphors, terms that are used, but just in terms of hard work and perseverance, there's so many lessons that are involved in the whole dynamic, the whole energy that athletes have to kind of muster in order to perform and to overcome obstacles. And so these stories are inspiring. And it's just like I was talking a little bit earlier about my experience at USA Network with the golf clinics for the kids. We want to inspire kids, we want to inspire people. And I think that there are a lot of these stories, these sports stories, that are very inspiring, and so that's our mission and vision.
Okay. All right. Something that we have a similar vision. That's how I kind of look at myself. I want to tell the story. So as I mentioned to you before, like I'm kind of like the voice of Dominican boxing, and I like to, as I did with you, I like to interview these people and get their life story. I kind of, I'm a journalist, but I also look at myself somewhat of a historian. and the fact that I documented so much stories from a specific country, and I've interviewed other people as well, but I like to think that like I corner the market. So if you ever want to know about Dominican boxing history, and these videos necessarily are not huge, I don't got a million views, but I feel like it's taking a snapshot of history, and where it may be more valued down the line. I feel like these stories and things people didn't know, and like for a good example, like that Panama Al Brown is such a jewel that people just don't know, and it's good that you're doing that kind of work, and your company's doing that kind of work, and you guys are trying to preserve history, because that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's very important. And then you found you kind of your niche with Dominican boxers. I know there's a guy out in Las Vegas that covers everything that has to do with Cuban boxers, right?
Yeah, my guy Willie, that's my guy.
Yeah. So there's those, within the larger framework of boxing, there's those niches, and you can also say to some extent that boxing is a niche sport, right? Because not everybody's a boxing.
Oh yeah,
fan.
yeah. For sure.
So but all of these focuses have their audience, have their interested viewers and listeners, and people who want to be practitioners, and certainly want to be inspired. I think so. I think that's great. And so, yeah, that's what we try to do, that all around, covering all sports, right? Including boxing, including baseball stories. Another story is the story of Alejandro Pompes was a Cuban, a black Cuban, who was the owner of the New York Cubans back in the 30s, right? He was part of the Negro League. He owned actually two teams, but he did a lot of things, including running numbers in Harlem, including running with Dutch Schultz, including having to be extradited from Mexico because the prosecutor Thomas Dewey at the time was after him. Thomas Dewey, if you might recall, there's a very famous picture of Truman with a newspaper opened up that says Dewey wins, which is an example of a headline that was wrong, because obviously Truman won the presidential election, not Thomas Dewey. But anyway, Thomas Dewey was a prosecutor in New York, and Alex Pompes was running numbers, but he was running numbers in order to finance a number of things, including the baseball team, because that's what a lot of people that owned Negro League teams had to do. They had to find some way of financing the teams. But at the end of his career, at the twilight of his career, as he was slowing down, he ended up being a scout for the New York Giants, actually, before they became the San Francisco Giants, and scouted Willie Mays, Orlando Cepeda, Juan Marichal, Willie McCovey. He had 5 Hall of Famers that he scouted for the New York Giants, and just a fascinating story. And I happened to have gone to Cooperstown the year that he got inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2006. I went there. I had no idea who he was, and then the project came much later on to do something on Alex Pompes, and that's another interesting story. Now, his story, you can do a mini series on his story, just like you could on Panama Al Brown. And so these are the types of things that we like to talk about, and let people know, entertaining and informative at the same time.
Okay. One of the things that a lot of people also don't know is that you work also for the New York State Athletic Commission. What is your exact title with the New York State Athletic Commission?
I'm a commissioner for the New York State Athletic Commission. There are currently 4 of us. There's a one slot that's open that was vacated by longtime commissioner Judge Edwin Torres. But yes, I'm a commissioner for the New York State Athletic Commission.
Okay. I know you can't get into specifics because I'm sure the investigations are ongoing. But Ryan Garcia recently fought in New York State, and he tested positive for a banned substance, and looks like he's appealing, and I won't ask you about the specifics because obviously it's ongoing. But when somebody tests positive for a banned substance, what is the typical suspension or punishment in New York State?
Well, it's done on a case by case basis. In the case of Ryan Garcia, he was tested before the fight, but the results came in after. Um, there's nothing typical, right? I think that if the fight, if the fight was sanctioned, because obviously we know the issue that happened prior to in terms of the weight. If he had won the championship, then we'd have something to deal with, right, in terms of the course of action. But as you said, I can't really speculate into what's going on there right now. But it's an unfortunate situation, that is, and it's part of what we do. Part of what we have to deal with. Now, I will say this: there is, unlike most athletic commissions, like the Nevada State Athletic Commission and others, the commissioner's role is different in that we don't run operations, right? We have a complete operations staff that really deals with a lot of the issues that you might be reading about and or hear about. Our job as commissioners is really to set policy, to make judgments on rule changes, and that type of thing. So it's more, that's the kind of oversight that we do. But we have a very, very able staff at the New York State Athletic Commission, very able staff under the leadership of Kim Sumbler, and it's really is a fantastic group, run very well. For every fight, they just do a spectacular job, and they don't need the commission, I guess, on them day to day. And it's just not part of the charter anymore. Things changed back in 2016 on that. That there's a separation between operations and the role of the commissioners. But it's the commission is in very able hands with the staff that they have.
Okay, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but it just recently was announced that Kim Sumbler is stepping down from her position. Were you aware of that? And then how do you feel about that, especially the timing as to what's going on in boxing? And
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, Kim was really a great leader for the group. She did a really great job the 8 years that she was there. This was very recent. I didn't know that this was already public, to be honest with you. But the acting commission will be Mike Matthew Delaglio, and he's done a great job with boxing. He's overseen boxing for quite a while. He does a great job. He really kind of holds it together. And she would tell you the same thing, that he's really a very able leader as well. So we'll see. But like I said, it's a very well-oiled machine. Kim came in and really helped do that and set that up, and it's in good hands. Okay. Everything that I said about how they operate still stands.
And again, we don't have to get specific with Ryan Garcia. We can just speak in general. I can't pronounce that word. You know what I mean? In general, it's so when a person appeals their drug test and they ask their B sample to get tested, what happens if it comes out negative? Because obviously, if the B sample comes out positive, it pretty much confirms what the A sample did. Are you at liberty to say what happens if the B sample comes out negative? Because now you got one positive, one negative. What happens there?
Well, listen, I can't answer that for two reasons. First of all, I don't know exactly what would happen, because that would have to be kind of looked at on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, if you have one positive and one negative, you kind of, what do you do at that point? Well, then maybe you do further testing. That would have to be kind of done, would be done on a case-by-case basis. But certainly it would be the most, the best outcome in the case of Ryan, if the result is negative. I can say that.
All right. All right, a couple more commission questions, and then I'll let you go. You've been very gracious with your time, and I've enjoyed the interview very much. Uh, so, what is the process of becoming a promoter in New York City? Like, if I wanted to open up Broadway boxing promotions, what would I have to do to become a promoter here in New York City? Well, New York State, I guess.
Well, first of all, you'd have to like fight it out with Lou DiBella because that's his operation.
Ah,
that's, that's the first thing. Someone coming in would basically, there's an application process, right? It's a licensing. You get licensed for a year. We would check a number of things about you as a person or as a promoter. You know, if you've done promotions in other places, we'd get references. We'll see we look at financials. You know, there's a whole, basically it's a vetting process that would make sure that you are financially stable enough that you put together a fight, the fighters get paid, right? That's important. And that we vet that out. And like I said, it's a licensing for a year. So, you know, it has to be renewed every year.
okay, all right. And what are your thoughts of boxing now? Both the talent pool. Is there anybody who you particular, whether it be up and coming or currently on top, that you really like? And the business structure. We both know the business structure is much different than it was even, let's say, 15 years ago. It's so much different the way the boxing business is. What's your opinion on boxing today?
Well, I I love the days when boxing was available to the masses on broadcast television. Clearly, you don't have to be on broadcast television with whatever the big five or whatever, however number of broadcasters are considered. It used to be the big three. Now I think it's the big five. You don't have to be on broadcast in order to have a broad audience. But the whole pay-per-view thing obviously kind of limits a lot of fights to people who know the value of that fight already, as opposed to exposing boxers, young boxers who may be on the undercard to larger audiences. So that's it. That's the business side of it. That it's pay per view. That in many cases you basically subscribe. You pay a monthly subscription to one of the streamers, and then on top of that, you pay between $70 and $100 for fights. That's going to limit the audience. And I don't know what that means in terms of growing. What the future of the sport is. Clearly, if you have a good night on pay per view, you have everyone wins, or most people win. But I would have to say that maybe I'm dating myself, but having the broadest audience for most fights is probably the thing that can grow the sport the most. Besides new fighters coming into the sport. And it's so interesting that throughout history, it's always been kind of like the working class, right? That puts on the gloves and fights. Now you've got YouTubers who are already multimillionaires coming in and getting a little piece of it as well. So the dynamics, as you said, really changed completely. And it's interesting. A lot of people lament the fact that you have YouTubers boxing, and is that keep the sport pure or not? I guess to some extent that's the balance between not having it on broadcast but still having somebody that has a few million followers get into the ring. Maybe that's kind of the balancing act there. So maybe you lose one thing but you gain another, and that's kind of the way I see things now. I mean, it can progress, it can change. I think that one fundamental thing is that people in general want to see combat, right? Going back to the days of the Roman gladiators, right? Where you think people that's boxing is violent. People were fighting to the death, and folks were like, in Rome, just salivating, and just they couldn't get enough of it. Here it's obviously a lot more civilized. But I think that there's always that inner urge that people have, the humans have, of watching combat. And so I think that boxing will continue to thrive. right next to mixed martial arts, which is obviously, over the last 10, 12, 15 years has really grown tremendously. I think they will both coexist, but boxing will always have a place in sports. And yeah, it's really kind of a matter of what kind of what outlets, what kind of exposure it'll have. Maybe it'll make it back to a broader um, theater in the sense of whether it's cable or whether it's streaming on a more accessible basis. But it's here. I don't think it's going anywhere, and it's healthy. And just like always, some people make out better than others, but it's still a sport that really requires a lot of discipline to participate in. And from a business standpoint, it really is a lot different than it used to be. And I just with people like you who are exposing, in your case, Dominican boxers and beyond that, as we have people like you coming in and taking an interest and giving it a platform, it'll live on for a long time.
So you do you see the future of boxing bleak? Do you see it? You think it can grow from here, or you just more so not sure where it can go, but know that it's always going to be around?
Well, I think no, I think it'll do. I think it'll continue to do well. Like I said, right now it's the trade-off is big broadcast platforms versus having people with a tremendous following, being in the sport and bringing their follows along with them. I think it'll find its way, kind of like water finding its way down or up. This way it's not against gravity, but water will always find its way. I think boxing will always find a place to be, to flow toward and be in the hands of the people who enjoy it. Just what form is it going to take? Like I said, right now it's kind of pay-per-view. A lot of it is driven by YouTubers, and still, obviously, you still have the traditional boxing that will always do well. But there's going to probably be different forms of getting it out there. You have also new companies that are combining boxing with hip hop and music. I was at a boxing event maybe about a year ago in New York, where right after the boxing event, I got out and there was a concert. Right, there was right there, and there was a little bit of that theme throughout the boxing match. So people are being creative in terms of how they present boxing and how they present it both in person and also over the internet or over digital platforms that exist. So I'm bullish on boxing. Yes, absolutely.
Well, Lino, thank you so much for this interview. I'm very, very happy that you agreed to do this. I feel like my audience definitely got a different look of what's out there, and I definitely want everybody watching this, who's watching this either live or afterwards, to go to Unánimo Deportes if you want. Most of my fan base is Latino, not all Dominicans, so we all pretty much can read in Spanish. Look, this is a very professional page where they cover all sports in Spanish, and I go support. And this is somebody who built up ESPN Deportes, and right now this is in its infancy stage, but I can definitely see it becoming bigger than that, especially since you're doing audio, video, written, and you're trying to expand, and you bring in all this experience. Plus, you said people who are working on this also work at ESPN Deportes. So there's definitely a lot of knowledge, power, and passion behind it, and it could only succeed for me. And who knows? I may get you that fourth Emmy. I'm telling you, I got a documentary idea. We'll talk off camera.
Yeah, no, definitely open and interested in hearing your idea. Yeah, us, we are the little engine that could mentality here. So absolutely, thank you for your well wishes, and yeah, there's much more to come.
And anything you need from me as far as support or help or anything, feel free to contact me, whether it be to come back on the show or if you want me on your platform or whatever. I'm more than willing to help and contribute and repay this favor of you coming on the show. I really, truly appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Broadway Joel. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, guys, that was Lino Garcia. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and go check out Unánimo Deportes. Until next time, guys, peace.
Take care.
All right, see ya.